to some big news coming out of Manchester United this morning. Sporting director Dan Ashworth has left the club after just 5 months in the role. That's according to The Athletic. Sam, I know you've got more on this story. What can you tell us?
Well, I haven't got any more than that. I know it's true. It's a brilliant story by David and Laurie, and it's got all the elements of a great newspaper or online, as we now say, story, and it's such a shock.
Yeah.
And clearly, the bigger picture is going to emerge, but this is an executive who they pursued very hard. I mean, it was a big signing in that world, and that he came from a rival. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Newcastle United, a very powerful club now. They've qualified for the Champions League, and to go and take a senior executive away like that is a big move. There was a lot of discussion when Jim Radcliffe's given interviews about how he objected to the gardening leave and how long it took for Ashworth to come over. I think I'm right in saying that he only started in July. So, I mean, this is an astonishingly quick kind of
I think he was on
falling out.
5 months of gardening leave, and he's been 5 months in the job.
That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, you can't. I mean, in football, you can't really do anything in 5 months. I mean, United, as I'm sure we will discuss, are this giant oil tanker that various different people have tried to turn in more profitable directions. But what I would say is I always felt there was quite a lot of execs assembled very quickly by Ineos. That's how they built their new kind of structure. They went and I understand why they built the hierarchy, but you've got Christopher Vell who was formerly at Chelsea. Jason Wilcox, who's formerly a technical director or sporting director at Southampton. They had a new chief executive, Omar Barada, came from Manchester City. And I suppose if one was to speculate, then you might say there was a bit of a kind of Hunger Games feel about it.
Dave Brailsford and then...
So then, yes, you're right.
Yeah,
and then you've got the whole kind of architecture that comes with Ineos. So you've got Sir Jim Radcliffe, who's clearly a very wealthy man and very powerful, used to getting his own way. Dave Brailsford, who'd come from British Cycling, who's I think his title is Technical Director of Ineos Sport, which covers a multitude of things.
Sam, do you think there's a tension between the fact that they've acquired all this expertise? As you say, Barada had come from City, Dan Ashworth had come from Newcastle, they went to great lengths to get him, but then you have Ratcliffe, as you say, wealthy man, and you have alongside him Brailsford, who's from cycling. He's not from football. We know what it's like in football, where there are lots of people who are very experienced, who have acquired that experience over a number of years. How do you go from working at a club where your experience is listened to another club where you are the person with that expertise, but you also have an owner who has alongside him someone he trusts implicitly, who's not, as some would describe it, a football man?
I think everyone would describe it as not a football man. He's a cycling man. That's what he did. I think it comes down to power in the end. I mean,
really?
I'm convinced that that's how football clubs operate, that in the end it's who seizes the power and who hangs on to it. And in this case, it looks like those with the power and the football operation is run by Ratcliffe. He only, we have to remember Ineos only has a minority stake. It's only around 25-27% when it all kind of is cashed in. But they run the club on behalf of the Glazers, who still have the majority share. Well, they have the majority of the votes of the shares that actually count as voting shares. I think it comes down to that. It comes down to power. I think Ratcliffe is in a hurry to run the club in the way that he wants. And I'd also wonder, I mean, we talk about another big departure with Erik ten Hag. So that was clearly was a botched operation to give him a new contract in the summer and then to have to get rid of him. So within the space of just a couple of months, they've got rid of two key people who they've invested in very heavily within the last 12 months.
Is this how you run an elite club then? Or not? Because this, you say, in a hurry to do stuff. 5 months, like you already said, it's not kind of like a sign that somebody can get their feet under the table and do what they needed to do. So Dan was perhaps struggling with what he needed to do in terms of his role. So I'm asking the question, does this show signs that this is another sign that Manchester United are not being run so well in terms of at the top?
Well, the presentation of Laurie, you mentioned David Ornstein and Laurie, well, both of whom broke this story. And Laurie tweeted this morning a couple of things that I found very interesting.
Yeah.
He said that the decision was made during conversations post-Forest yesterday. Now, obviously, the atmosphere fairly febrile post-Forest yesterday. So you do wonder, it would be a natural assumption to make, well, in what kind of atmosphere was that decision come to? And the second thing he said in that tweet that he put out this morning, Laurie, with his exclusive in conjunction with David, presented as mutual. Now, what does that mean?
It means he doesn't believe it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that suggests, to your point, Sam, that there are fractures behind the scenes. There is the only thing you could assume from looking at that is that there is some kind of power struggle. It's a natural assumption to make. And you can only judge, in answer to your question about the way to run things behind the scenes, by what other clubs have done.
Yeah.
The transition between Jurgen Klopp and Arne Slot at Liverpool has been seamless. And nobody knew he was coming until he was coming. And since he's been there, there has been a real smoothness about the way that things have operated. You mentioned lots of cooks at Old Trafford. There they are.
Yeah. There's a lot going on, isn't it, really? I mean, we haven't got a comparison to another, the Liverpools, but I dare say there's perhaps less players in the hierarchy in terms of other clubs,
yeah.
maybe?
Just off the top of my head, I mean, so Liverpool are obviously owned by FSG, and that their whole operation now is run by Michael Edwards, who's returned to the club since Klopp left. And they have a sporting director, Richard Hughes, at Liverpool. But I think it's fair to say that all power flows through Michael Edwards via Mike Gordon, one of the presidents of FSG, who own multiple they own some big American franchises, sporting franchises, but they're trying to buy another European club. We digress. I mean, Jean-Claude Blanc has been temporary CEO of Manchester United. I mean, I think they've been through about 4 CEOs in the last 18 months. You had Richard Arnold, you had their general counsel, who was, I think, Patrick Stewart, who was for a while CEO. Now you've got Omar Barada.
But I dare say this is costing them a bob or two as well when people go.
When you sack expensive executives, yes, I imagine they have big kind of severance fees, and we've talked about they've sacked a lot of their rank and file staff. They sacked 250 people, have been made redundant at Manchester United, and that does happen after takeovers, and it's very, very painful for those involved. But it's cost them a lot of money to sack Ten Hag and his staff. And I would be doubtful that it's going to be cheap to do the same with Dan Ashworth. I mean, and this is pure speculation. I do wonder if there was something in the contract that made it cheaper to do it earlier rather than later. But that's just me talking off the top of my head. I have no idea if that's right.
But you can join dots. I mean, Martin Samuel makes a point in the Sunday Times this morning that the costs are passed on to the fans because it doesn't cost the club a lot of money, it's the fans. And we've seen this week that the clubs have made their views known about their disquiet, their displeasure, their anger in many cases over the fact that it costs far more to watch Manchester United, whether you're an adult, whether you're a child, than it did previously. All of these departures from the club are having a knock-on effect on the people who pay, who have that financial as well as emotional investment in the football club.
You've got a piece, haven't you, in The Sun, I think, on...
I do. It's the back page of The Sun, and it's mediocre. And it's an interview given by Sir Jim Ratcliffe to Andy Mitten at the United We Stand fanzine. Now, this is a journalist show, and Andy's a superb journalist, and to be able to elicit the amount of trust it takes for someone so influential in the game to be as honest and open as Jim Ratcliffe has been to Andy cannot be understated. What does beg the question is why Sir Jim... And it's kind of weird asking this question because we are in the information business. I will never sit here and say that people shouldn't talk. Never. I will never do it, all right? But when to talk... when to speak is very different. And I just feel like the timing of this, I'm not sure it helps the club. It was before the match yesterday. It was before the defeat. But I'll just point to some of the things that he told Andy. As I say, Andy's done a great job in being able to elicit this level of trust from him. He's had a go at, he's justified the ticket prices. He said the whole club is mediocre, hence the headline. Look at the subject there as well. Sir Jim rips into clubs stuck in the last century. That's a reference to their data analysis, which he says doesn't really exist. You never heard this kind of thing from David Gill. You never heard this kind of thing from any of his predecessors, because do ownerships of big clubs do this?
Do they, it's a genuine question. Does Sir Jim need the Manchester United fans on board with him? Is he at risk of kind of alienating some of the fans?
I don't think he cares. I think he's in a hurry. He's 72 years old. He's finally got his hands on a big British football club. He's tried, he had a go at buying Chelsea as well. He says he's a United fan as a child. So I think he's past caring. And
to the point, Sam, what impact will this make?
I think United is a ship on such choppy waters. I think you're right. 25 years ago, something like this would have had a huge impact. But these storms seem to blow by very quickly now because of the chaos that's engulfed them post Ferguson. And to be honest, he's right. I mean, mediocre's kind at times by the amount relative to the amount of money they've spent. It's been much worse than mediocre, I would say, over since Fergie left in 2013. I think mediocre is probably, if you were just to, without looking at the sort of sums invested by the club, that's probably a fair assumption. But actually, I think millions and millions have been wasted compared to, you look at clubs like the way that Liverpool and Arsenal have rebuilt, even though they don't have a state owner or a kind of Middle Eastern royal in charge, they've done such a better job of it than United. United have not, for all the criticism of the Glazers, they have spent money on contracts and fees, but the returns have been so poor.
When you say he doesn't care, I mean, you don't mean he doesn't care about the club, do you? You mean just quantify
what he cares about the reaction so much.
Okay.
I think
he's there to make this club better, right? That's
I think
exactly
people
what
like that have always existed in football. We've always had, going right back, through the 60s and 70s, had outspoken chairmen or managers, and that's been a tradition of football. I think in the more recent history, where football's been through a much more kind of sort of corporate kind of facelift, really, and clubs have tended to behave more like sort of FTSE 100 companies, whatever. There's been more restraint from executives. But I don't think he sees it that way. I don't actually mind it. I think he's right, but I think he's in a real hurry, and that takes us back to the Ashworth situation. He's made a quick decision, and he knows that people are going to be discussing it on TV and in the newspapers saying this looks like chaos, but he's done it because he thinks it's the right one. I don't think he really minds what people think. I think he's well past that stage of his life.
What about Ruben Amorim? What will he be thinking at the moment? Because obviously he's come to the club, the right one, perhaps that's, right place, right time, he feels. But he's going to wake up to this news as well. Obviously, they got the defeat yesterday as well. What have we learnt so far under his tenure, do you think?
We've learned that there is a greater appetite to work among the players for him.
Okay.
I really like the performance in the Everton game. I'm not too perturbed by what I saw yesterday, because I think at the moment he's still working out who is part of his plans and who's not. And given that he doesn't have a pre-season to be able to do that, he's got to use the games to be able to do that. Højlund looks a better player under him. There are certain players, you look at the likes of Ahmad and Ugarte and Fernandes, who took his goal superbly well yesterday. There are certain players who are going to thrive under him. I'll just say it, I think Martinez is bullied on set pieces, and I'm not quite sure he's going to be in the United back four of the future. I know Sam raised an eyebrow there, Carlo Ancelotti style, but so maybe you might disagree with that.
Do you? Go on.
No, I think it's a fair point. I wasn't at the game. I was at Palace yesterday, but watching the highlights, I felt that it came down to individual errors. And it may just be over the course of time that Martinez does get moved on, or Onana is judged not to be good. They both made big mistakes yesterday, and there's not much a new manager can do about that. I think they've got the appointment right. I think he's a really credible figure. I think what he achieved at Sporting was pretty amazing. A lot about the modern manager is the presentation, and he does that brilliantly.
Yes.
But in the end, it is the results, and he believes in something. He's got a way of playing. I mean, that doesn't guarantee you success, but it gives you a foundation for it, and I think it's the way he just has to show progress. He just has to show progress, and that's not easy. I mean, Erik ten Hag won 2 trophies, so it's not simple to do that. And sometimes it's people hate. I know this is a certain cadre of people don't like it when you say this, but it's not always the result. I mean, the performance tells you a lot as well.
Yeah.
So, yes, going back to your earlier point, which is very pertinent, is how will he feel this morning? I'm sure he will be flabbergasted. I mean, Dan Ashworth was there greeting him as he got out the people carrier to walk into the training ground for the first time. He must be thinking, my goodness, I've really got to get a handle on the politics of this club. I'm sure that he was fully briefed on it, and he didn't learn about it logging on to The Athletic. You know, he would have. I would have liked to think he would have known about it before then. So I'm sure a lot of their efforts this morning will be going to sort of explain to Ruben what's happened and make sure he's okay and on board, and smoothing that before they then turn their attentions to the public perception of the club.
I think if you join the dots, I mean, quite clearly looking at what we've seen yesterday and in midweek, they need reinforcements. Now, what are those reinforcements going to look like? You would imagine maybe Dan would have been on board with what Ruben would have wanted. It may well be that other people might not be on board with what Ruben wanted. So, as Sam was saying, maybe there does need to be, well, they would have had that conversation already. But you do wonder how it will fit into their recruitment plans going forward, and what that would look like. And the other thing that Sam said, which is absolutely true, and we've got to be fair, yes, this is a difficult time for United, and it could be easy to criticise them, but they did back Ten Hag. To a lot of people's surprise, they did back him almost in every position on the pitch, if I'm not mistaken.
And obviously Dan was a huge part of that.
Absolutely. And subsequently, in the summer as well, when they gave him a new deal, they did back him. It is not true to say that they don't give the managers money. It is just a question that's raised now, a legitimate one, over what those reinforcements are going to look like.
And you wonder, actually, not that we've got time to discuss it, whether they're going to reinforce that position, whether Dan Ashworth's position will be replaced by somebody, and who do they get in that role going forward. But like I say, that's a whole other show, I think. Let's go to the papers. Mad Dog Soft Kittens we've got, is that right?
Yeah, well, we saw the coverage on Sky Sports News last week, didn't we, of Ruben Amorim's press conference, where he talked about wanting to see Mad Dogs. He wanted effort. He said the fans, if nothing else, they want to see effort from the players. The problem was yesterday, that was all they saw, effort. But they didn't see good enough decision-making. They didn't see good enough quality. They didn't see enough goals, which is why, obviously, Manchester United lost. And Simon's assessment of this match was that they were pussycats. They were kittens yesterday rather than mad dogs. And it's going to take so much more from this side for some players to be in his plans going forward. I think some of the cull is going to be quite ruthless, I think. Because initially I thought, well, there's still a lot of good players there, and all it needs is kind of the kind of thing that we saw from Unai Emery at Aston Villa when he arrived, and you took them from, 14th in the Premier League up to the fringes of the European places. I think it's very different at United. I think it's going to take a lot longer, but he does need that time.
They don't have any money either. They've made losses over the last 3 years. Their PSR is right on the brink. So making changes, they're pretty snookered there, really.